What are you doing in a place like this, son?
I don't know.
Samuel Washington thought his grandson was living in luxury with his stepmother. For 18 years, he sent $2 million to ensure Isaiah wanted for nothing. But when private investigators found the 18-year-old sleeping in a shelter in Chicago wearing donated clothes, Samuel asked one question that made stepmother Patricia's face go pale. Where is every penny I sent? If you've ever wondered how far some people will go for money, this story will leave you speechless. This is about betrayal, stolen futures, and a grandfather's fight to give his grandson the life he deserved. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because stories like this need to be heard. Now let's get into what really happened. Samuel Washington sat behind his mahogany desk on the 72nd floor of his downtown Chicago office building, staring at the skyline he had helped shape over 4 decades. At 73 years old, he had built an empire worth $3 billion through commercial real estate development. His building stood tall across 3 continents, monuments to his vision and relentless work ethic. But on this cold November morning, none of that mattered. The man sitting across from him, private investigator James Turner, had just delivered news that made Samuel's carefully constructed world crack down the middle. James slid a manila folder across the polished desk, his expression grim. Inside were photographs that Samuel initially couldn't process. A young man with warm brown skin and a close-cropped fade. He wore clothes that had seen better days, standing in line at what appeared to be a soup kitchen. Another photo showed him sleeping on a narrow cot in a crowded room. The final image captured him washing dishes in an industrial sink, soap suds covering his slender arms. Samuel's hands began to shake as he studied the young man's face. Those eyes, that determined set of his jaw when he focused on something. It was like looking at a ghost. "That's impossible," Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible. "Isaiah is supposed to be living in Oak Park with Pat. He's supposed to be preparing for college. He's supposed to have everything he needs." James leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Washington, I've been doing this work for 27 years. I followed the address you gave me, the one where you've been sending money all these years. That's a mansion worth $2.3 million. Patricia lives there with her 2 biological children, both in private school. But Isaiah..." He paused, letting the weight settle. "Isaiah has been living at Mercy House Shelter on the south side for the past 3 months. Before that, I traced him to a rundown apartment building on West Madison. The landlord remembers him. Said he showed up 18 years ago as a baby with a woman who kept him isolated. Said he rarely saw the boy outside. Then 3 months ago the woman moved out and left the boy behind with nothing. No notice, no explanation, just gone." Samuel felt his chest tighten. His doctor had warned him about stress, about his blood pressure, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. For 18 years he had faithfully sent money every single month. Not once had he missed a payment. Not once had he questioned whether Pat was doing right by his grandson. He had trusted her because she was family, because she had come to him in his darkest hour with open arms and promises. The day his daughter Ruth died remained the worst day of Samuel's life. Ruth had been his only child, his pride and joy, a brilliant young woman who worked as a pediatric nurse and had dreams of opening her own community health clinic. She had married Michael Jenkins, a kind man who worked as a high school teacher and coach. They had been so happy together, so full of plans. Then Michael died in a car accident, struck by a drunk driver on his way home from basketball practice. Ruth had been 6 months pregnant. The grief nearly destroyed her, but she held on for the baby growing inside her. She held on through those final 3 months, determined to bring her son into the world. But childbirth complications took her life even as baby Isaiah took his first breath. Samuel had been in that hospital room, watching the doctors fight to save his daughter while nurses whisked the crying newborn away. He had failed. Failed to protect Ruth. Failed to keep her safe. Failed to prevent the unthinkable. In the days after Ruth's funeral, Samuel could barely function. He was a 70-year-old widower who had just buried his only child. Taking care of a newborn seemed impossible, especially with his demanding business schedule and his own crushing grief. That's when Patricia appeared. She was Michael's older sister, a woman Samuel had met only twice before. She came to his home with kind words and a reasonable proposal. She would raise Isaiah as her own. Give the baby a stable home with her own 2 children who could be like siblings. Samuel would maintain financial responsibility, of course, because that's what Ruth would have wanted. Patricia made it all sound so perfect, so right. "Your brother would have wanted this," Samuel remembered telling her, his voice hollow with grief. "He loved Ruth so much. This baby is all we have left of them both." Patricia had nodded solemnly, taken his hand, and promised to love Isaiah like her own flesh and blood. Samuel set up the arrangement immediately through his lawyers. He would send $10,000 monthly to an account established in Isaiah's name, but managed by Pat as guardian. Over 18 years, that amounted to more than $2 million. Money to ensure his grandson had everything he needed. Education, healthcare, clothes, opportunities, a future. He signed papers giving Patricia legal guardianship while maintaining his financial responsibility and the right to visit. But Pat had suggested that visits might confuse the child, might make things harder. Let him settle into a routine, Pat had said. Let him feel secure. We can arrange visits when he's older. Samuel, drowning in his own pain, had agreed. He told himself he was doing the right thing. He told himself this was what Ruth would have wanted. He told himself that money could fix what his absence couldn't. Now, staring at photos of his grandson sleeping in a homeless shelter, Samuel understood the magnitude of his failure. He hadn't just been sending money into a void. He had been funding Patricia's comfortable life while Isaiah suffered in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. "I need to see him," Samuel said, standing abruptly. His assistant tried to stop him at the door, reminding him of meetings and conference calls, but Samuel brushed past her. James followed close behind as they took the private elevator down to the parking garage where Samuel's Mercedes waited. The drive to the south side took 40 minutes through Chicago traffic. Samuel watched the neighborhoods change outside his tinted windows. The gleaming towers of downtown gave way to modest brick buildings, then to areas showing the wear of disinvestment and struggle. Mercy House Shelter occupied a renovated church building with peeling white paint and a sign advertising free meals and emergency housing. Samuel had donated to places like this over the years, written checks to ease his conscience, but he had never actually visited one, never truly understood what desperation looked like up close. He felt shame burning in his chest as he stepped out of his luxury car onto cracked pavement. Inside, the shelter was clean but worn. Metal cots lined the walls of what had once been the church sanctuary. People of all ages moved about quietly, some tending to small children, others just staring at nothing. The smell of industrial cleaner mixed with cooking food from the kitchen area. A woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and warm eyes approached them, her name tag read, Mrs. Elizabeth Adewale, Director. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had immigrated from West Africa decades ago. Samuel cleared his throat. "I'm looking for Isaiah Washington. I was told he's staying here." Mrs. Adewale's expression shifted from professional courtesy to surprised recognition. She knew who Samuel was. Everyone in Chicago knew Samuel Washington's face from business magazines and charity galas. "May I ask what this is regarding?" she said carefully. "I'm his grandfather," Samuel said, the words feeling strange on his tongue after 18 years of absence. Mrs. Adewale studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "He's in the kitchen working his shift." She led them through a narrow hallway to a large institutional kitchen where several people prepared food for the evening meal. And there at the industrial sink, with his hands submerged in soapy water, stood his grandson. Isaiah was tall and lean with his mother's high cheekbones and graceful posture. He wore jeans that were slightly too short and a donated sweatshirt that had seen better days. His hair was cut close and he wore no jewelry. But even in these circumstances, he carried himself with quiet dignity. He laughed at something another worker said, his face lighting up briefly before returning to the serious work of scrubbing a large pot. Samuel's heart broke watching him. This was supposed to be a young man preparing for college, worrying about normal teenage things. Instead, he was washing dishes in a homeless shelter just to earn his next meal. "Isaiah," Mrs. Adewale called gently. "Could you come here for a moment, son?" Isaiah dried his hands on a towel and turned around. When he saw Samuel and James standing there in their expensive suits, confusion crossed his face. He walked over cautiously, the way someone might approach a situation they didn't fully understand but knew might change everything. "Yes, ma'am," Isaiah said softly, his eyes moving between the three of them. Up close, Samuel could see Ruth even more clearly, the shape of his face, the way he held his head, even the cautious intelligence in his eyes. His daughter lived on in this young man, and he had abandoned him to strangers and cruelty. "Do you know who I am?" Samuel asked, his voice cracking despite his efforts to remain composed. Isaiah studied his face carefully, then shook his head. "No, sir. Should I?" The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. Should he know his own grandfather? Yes. Should he recognize the man who was supposed to protect him? Absolutely. Should he have grown up knowing he had family who loved him? Without question. "I'm Samuel Washington," he said quietly. "I'm your grandfather. Your mother was my daughter, Ruth." Isaiah's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, something that might have been hope, then a protective shuddering. "That's not possible," he said, taking a small step back. "Aunt Pat told me my grandfather wanted nothing to do with me. She said you blamed me for my mother's death. She said you never wanted to see me." The room tilted slightly. Samuel reached out to steady himself against the doorframe. James moved closer, ready to catch him if needed. Mrs. Adewale brought a chair, but Samuel waved it away. He needed to stay standing for this. "That's a lie," Samuel said, his voice gaining strength through sheer fury at what had been done to this child. "I have never blamed you for anything. I have sent money every single month since you were born. $10,000 every month for 18 years, over $2 million total." Isaiah stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "I don't understand," he whispered. "What money? I've never had any money. I don't even have a bank account." Samuel pulled the folder from under his arm, the one James had given him that morning. He opened it to show bank statements, transfer records, 18 years of documented payments. Every single month, $10,000 deposited into an account established in Isaiah Washington's name. But the account manager, the person with access and authorization to use those funds, was listed as Patricia Jenkins, legal guardian. Isaiah's hands trembled as he looked at the papers. Other workers in the kitchen had stopped working, sensing something important was happening. Mrs. Adewale put a protective hand on Isaiah's shoulder. "This says $2 million, Isaiah said, his voice barely audible. "Where is it? Why am I here? Why do I have nothing?" Samuel felt tears he hadn't cried since Ruth's funeral begin to well up. "That's what I'm going to find out," he promised. "And whoever stole your future is going to pay for every single day you've suffered." The next hours passed in a blur. Samuel insisted Isaiah come with him immediately, but he was hesitant. 18 years of Patricia's lies had taught him to trust no one, to expect nothing, to believe he deserved the scraps he received. Mrs. Adewale, bless her heart, sat down with Isaiah and spoke to him quietly. Whatever she said helped, because Isaiah finally nodded and agreed to go with Samuel. He gathered his few belongings from the shelter, a backpack containing 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a college preparation book, and a photo of a woman Isaiah had never met but somehow knew was his mother. Samuel learned later that Patricia had given him that single photo when she threw him out. A cruel parting gift. As they drove back toward downtown, Isaiah sat in the back seat of the Mercedes, staring out the window at the city passing by. Samuel tried to make conversation to bridge the impossible gap of 18 lost years, but words felt inadequate. What could he say? "I'm sorry didn't cover it. I didn't know" rang hollow. He should have known. He should have checked. He should have demanded to see his grandson, should have fought through Pat's excuses and delays. His penthouse occupied the entire top floor of one of his own buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Lake Michigan and the glittering city below. The space was decorated with expensive art and custom furniture, every surface speaking of wealth and taste. When Isaiah walked in, he seemed to shrink as if afraid to touch anything or leave marks on the pristine floors. Samuel's housekeeper, Mary, was a kind woman in her 50s who had worked for him for over 20 years. She took one look at Isaiah and immediately went into action, not asking questions but simply doing what needed to be done. She showed Isaiah to a guest room that was larger than the entire apartment Isaiah had shared with Patricia. She ran a bath with expensive salts and oils. She laid out soft towels and a robe. Later she would go shopping for clothes that actually fit, but for now she found some items that would work. Samuel stood in his study, phone pressed to his ear, calling in every favor he had accumulated over 4 decades in business. First call went to Stephen Carter, the best forensic accountant in Chicago. "I need you to trace every penny of $2 million, Samuel said without preamble. "I need to know where it went, what it bought, and who benefited. And I need it yesterday." Second call went to his personal attorney, David Morrison. "I need you to prepare criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and anything else you can make stick. The target is Patricia Jenkins. I want her to feel the full weight of what she's done." Third call was the hardest. Samuel dialed the number he had called monthly for 18 years, the number Pat had provided for emergencies only. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and false. "Samuel, what a surprise. Is everything all right?" "I found Isaiah," Samuel said, his voice cold enough to freeze water. There was a pause just a fraction too long. "What do you mean?" "Isaiah is right here." Stop lying, Samuel said. I found him in a homeless shelter. I found him washing dishes for his next meal. I found him wearing donated clothes and sleeping on a cot. So I'm going to ask you one time, and you better think very carefully before you answer. Where is the $2 million I sent for my grandson? Another pause, longer this time. When Patricia spoke again, the fake warmth had drained from her voice. I don't know what he told you, but I provided for that boy. He had a roof over his head, food to eat. The money was used appropriately. Then you'll have no problem providing receipts, Samuel said. Bank statements, bills, school records, medical expenses. I want documentation for every penny. My attorney will be in touch. He hung up before she could respond. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He wandered his penthouse, checking on Isaiah every hour. The young man slept fitfully, even in the comfortable bed, as if his body couldn't quite believe it was real. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Samuel found him sitting in the dark living room, staring out at the city lights. Can't sleep either? Samuel asked gently, sitting in a chair across from him. Isaiah shook his head. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up back at the shelter, that this is some kind of dream or trick. It's real, Samuel assured him. And I promise you, Isaiah, you're never going back there. You're never going to be hungry or cold or alone again. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. She told me you hated me, he finally said. Aunt Patricia. She said my birth killed my mother and you blamed me. She said you wanted nothing to do with Michael's family after he died. She said the only reason she took me in was out of Christian charity, even though I was a burden. Samuel felt rage building in his chest, the kind that made him want to break things. None of that is true, he said firmly. Your mother died because of a medical complication. It wasn't your fault. It was nobody's fault. And I never ever blamed you. You're all I have left of Ruth. You're precious to me even though I've done a terrible job of showing it. Isaiah looked at him with those eyes that were so much like his mother's. Why didn't you come see me in 18 years? Why didn't you visit even once? It was the question Samuel had been asking himself since that morning. Because I was a coward, he admitted. Because I was drowning in grief and I convinced myself that money was enough, that as long as I sent checks I was fulfilling my responsibility. I let Patricia tell me that visits would confuse you, that you needed stability, that I should wait until you were older. And I believed her because it was easier than facing my own pain. But you sent money? Isaiah asked, still trying to understand. Every month. $10,000. I have the bank records to prove it. The account was in your name, but Pat was the manager. She was supposed to use it for your care, your education, your future. Instead, it looks like she used it to build her own comfortable life. Over the next few days, Stephen worked his magic with financial records. What he uncovered was damning. Patricia had indeed been depositing Samuel's checks into the account in Isaiah's name, but then she had been transferring the money to her personal accounts and spending it freely. The house in Oak Park, purchased 5 years ago for $2.3 million, paid entirely with funds from Isaiah's account. 2 luxury vehicles, also purchased with Isaiah's money. Private school tuition for Patricia's biological children, both attending prestigious academies at $40,000 per year each. Family vacations to Nigeria every summer, staying in 5-star hotels. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, regular spa treatments. Patricia had been living like a wealthy woman while Isaiah wore donated clothes. But the cruelty went deeper than financial theft. James's investigation revealed that Pat had deliberately isolated Isaiah. Homeschooling wasn't about providing quality education. It was about control. It kept Isaiah from making friends who might ask questions. It kept him from teachers who might notice neglect. It kept him trapped in that small apartment with no knowledge of the outside world or his rights. Patricia had provided the bare minimum. Enough food to keep Isaiah alive, a place to sleep, basic clothes. But there was no love, no encouragement, no investment in Isaiah's future. And when Isaiah turned 18, Patricia simply discarded him like trash. Told him to leave and figure out his own life. Gave him that single photo of Ruth and nothing else. No birth certificate, no social security card, no money, no support system. Just abandonment. Samuel learned that Isaiah had spent the first month after being thrown out sleeping in parks and public libraries. He had eventually found his way to Mercy House, where Mrs. Adewale had recognized something special in the quiet, polite young man who asked for nothing but was willing to work for everything. Isaiah had been studying for his GED at the library during the day and working in the shelter kitchen at night. He dreamed of college someday, maybe becoming a nurse like the mother he never knew. But without resources or support, those dreams seemed impossibly distant. Now living in Samuel's penthouse, Isaiah was slowly learning what it meant to be cared for. Mary made sure he ate regular meals, noticed he liked his eggs scrambled and his toast lightly buttered. Samuel took time away from work to sit with him to tell him stories about Ruth. He showed Isaiah photo albums he had kept hidden away, too painful to look at until now. Videos of Ruth as a child, as a teenager, graduating from nursing school, meeting Michael. Isaiah watched everything with hungry eyes, absorbing details about the mother he had been denied. 2 weeks after finding Isaiah, Samuel decided it was time to confront Patricia face to face. His lawyers advised against it, said to let the courts handle everything. But Samuel needed to look her in the eye, needed to understand how someone could be so cruel to an innocent child. He told Isaiah he didn't have to come, that he could handle this alone. But Isaiah insisted. "She stole my life, grandfather. I deserve to be there." They drove to Oak Park on a cold Saturday morning. The mansion sat on a tree-lined street where houses cost millions and neighbors valued their privacy. Samuel had paid for this house without even knowing it. Every brick and window bought with money meant for his grandson. Pat's Mercedes SUV sat in the driveway, gleaming and expensive. Samuel's own Mercedes pulled up behind it, and he, Isaiah, James, and attorney David Morrison got out. Samuel rang the doorbell. Patricia answered, and the transformation on her face was almost comical. She had clearly expected a delivery or perhaps a neighbor. Instead, she found herself staring at Samuel Washington, the man she had been lying to for 18 years. Then she saw Isaiah standing beside him, no longer the discarded boy in donated clothes, but a young man in a proper coat and boots, standing tall. The blood drained from Patricia's face. Her mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. "Hello, Patricia," Samuel said with cold courtesy. "I think we need to talk." Patricia tried to close the door, but David Morrison was already pushing forward with legal authority. "Mrs. Jenkins, you can speak with us now or you can speak with the police. Your choice." They ended up in Patricia's living room, a space decorated with expensive furniture and African art. Everything in this room had been purchased with stolen money, and the knowledge sat between them like poison. Patricia perched on the edge of a leather sofa, her hands twisting in her lap. She kept glancing at Isaiah as if she couldn't quite believe the boy had found his way back. "Samuel, please," Patricia started, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "Let me explain. It's not what you think." Samuel slammed the folder of bank statements onto the coffee table so hard that Pat flinched. $2 million, he said, his voice deadly quiet. 18 years of monthly deposits. Every penny I sent to ensure my grandson had the life he deserved. Where is it, Pat? Where is every single penny? Pat's face had gone from pale to an ashen gray. Her hands trembled. "I used it for Isaiah's benefit," she said, but the lie sounded weak even to her own ears. "Did you?" Samuel leaned forward. "Because my investigators tell a different story. They tell me you bought this house, those cars outside, sent your own children to private school, took vacations to Nigeria every summer, all while my grandson wore donated clothes and slept in a homeless shelter. I gave him a place to live," Pat protested. "I fed him. I kept a roof over his head for 18 years. That cost money." Isaiah spoke up for the first time, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath. "You kept me in a tiny apartment. You homeschooled me so I couldn't make friends or tell anyone how you treated me. You gave me your leftover food and hand-me-down clothes. You never let me leave except for grocery shopping. And when I turned 18, you threw me out with nothing. No documents, no money, no support. You told me to figure out my own life because you had done enough." Patricia's eyes flashed with anger, the mask finally dropping. "You ungrateful boy. I took you in when no one else wanted you. I raised you when your grandfather was too busy making money to care about you." "That's a lie," Samuel's voice rose. "I called you every month. I asked about him. You told me he was doing well, that he was happy, that he didn't want to see me because it would confuse him. And you believed me," Patricia shot back. "You never bothered to check. You never demanded to see him. You were content to throw money at the problem and ease your guilty conscience. So don't act like you're some kind of hero now." The accusation stung because it held truth. Samuel had failed to verify, to insist, to do more than send checks. But that didn't excuse what Patricia had done. "You're right," Samuel said quietly. "I failed Isaiah by not doing more. I will have to live with that guilt for the rest of my life. But you deliberately stole from a child. You isolated him, neglected him, and threw him away when he was no longer useful. Why, Pat? Why would you do this to an innocent child?" Something broke in Patricia's expression. Years of careful lies and justifications crumbled, and underneath was pure, ugly resentment. Because she had everything, Patricia spat. Beautiful Ruth with her perfect life. My brother loved her more than he ever loved me, his own sister. She got the education, the career, the husband who adored her. And then she died and left behind this child. And suddenly everyone cared about the baby. You sent money, lots of money, more money than I had ever seen. And I thought, why should this child have everything when my own children had so little? Why should Ruth's son have advantages my children never got? So you stole from a baby, Samuel said, his disgust evident. You saw a vulnerable infant and decided to use him as your meal ticket. You took money meant to give him opportunities and used it to build your own comfortable life, all while telling him he was worthless, that his own grandfather didn't want him. Patricia's face was splotchy now, tears of frustration and anger running down her cheeks. I gave him a place to live. That should be enough. He should be grateful. Isaiah stood up, his voice shaking but strong. Grateful? You want me to be grateful that you gave me scraps while you lived in luxury bought with my money? You want me to be grateful that you lied to me about my grandfather, made me think I was alone in the world? You want me to be grateful that you threw me out to survive on the streets the moment I turned 18? Before Patricia could respond, David Morrison made a phone call. Within 15 minutes, police arrived. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged documents, witness statements from neighbors who remembered the quiet boy they rarely saw. Pat was arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, identity theft, and child endangerment. As officers led Patricia out in handcuffs, her 2 children came down the stairs, alerted by the commotion. They were teenagers now, 15 and 17, and they watched in confusion and horror as their mother was taken away. They had lived well, attended good schools, never wanted for anything, and they had no idea it was all built on stolen money and a cousin's suffering. Samuel made arrangements for those children to stay with their maternal aunt. They were innocent in this, victims of their mother's choices. He would ensure they were cared for even though his priority was Isaiah. The trial happened faster than most because the evidence was overwhelming. Financial analysis left no room for doubt. Bank employees testified about how Patricia had set up the account, claiming Isaiah had special needs and couldn't manage his own money. Neighbors testified about the isolated boy they sometimes glimpsed. Mrs. Adewale testified about the state Isaiah was in when he arrived at the shelter. Malnourished, traumatized, with no resources or support. And Isaiah himself testified. He sat in that courtroom and told his story with quiet dignity. He explained the years of isolation, the minimal care, the lies about his grandfather. He described being thrown out with nothing on his 18th birthday. He talked about sleeping in parks and libraries before finding the shelter. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Patricia to 12 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution of $2 million plus interest and damages. Her assets were seized, the house, the cars, everything purchased with stolen money. The funds recovered were placed in a new trust for Isaiah, this time properly protected with oversight and safeguards. 6 months passed. Isaiah enrolled at Northwestern University, studying social work with a focus on youth aging out of foster care. He wanted to help others who had faced similar struggles, to be the advocate he never had. He lived with Samuel, and they slowly built the relationship they should have had all along. Samuel taught him about business, about their family history, about the strong line of ancestors who had overcome obstacles to build better lives. He introduced him to distant relatives who welcomed him with open arms. Isaiah discovered he had cousins, aunts, uncles, a whole family tree he never knew existed. He learned about his mother through stories and videos, through photo albums and saved letters. And Samuel learned about Isaiah, his intelligence, his compassion, his surprising sense of humor. He loved old movies and spicy food and had a talent for drawing. He was studying hard but also learning to relax, to trust that he didn't have to earn every meal or prove his worth to deserve basic care. One Saturday morning, Isaiah asked Samuel to drive him somewhere. He directed him back to the south side to Mercy House Shelter. Mrs. Adewale greeted them at the door with a huge smile and tight hugs. Isaiah had been volunteering there every weekend, helping other young people navigate resources and opportunities. He understood their struggles because he had lived them. But today was special. Isaiah had worked with Samuel to establish a scholarship fund for shelter residents who wanted to pursue education. The Ruth Washington Second Chance Scholarship would cover tuition, books, housing, and support services for young people aging out of foster care or experiencing homelessness. The first 3 recipients stood nervously in Mrs. Adewale's office as Isaiah presented them with award letters. Samuel watched his grandson comfort these young people, share his story, and offer hope. This was who Ruth would have been, someone who took her pain and transformed it into purpose. After the presentation, Samuel and Isaiah drove to the cemetery where Ruth was buried. They stood before her grave, a simple but elegant headstone that Samuel had visited countless times over the years. Today felt different. Today he wasn't coming alone with his grief and failure. Today he had brought his grandson home. "I found him, baby girl," Samuel said softly, placing fresh flowers on the grave. "Our Isaiah. He's everything you would have wanted him to be. Strong, kind, brilliant. He survived things no child should face, and he came through it with grace." Isaiah placed his own flowers next to Samuel's. He pulled out a photo, the first one of him and Samuel together, taken at his university orientation. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. "I finally got to meet Grandfather. I finally got to come home. I wish you were here, but I feel you with me. I feel you in every kind thing Grandfather does, every story he tells about you. I promise to make you proud." That evening, back at the penthouse, Isaiah sat at Samuel's desk working on an essay for one of his classes. The assignment was to write about a transformative experience. He had been writing for an hour, words flowing easily now that he had so much to say. Samuel brought him tea the way he liked it, with honey and lemon. He squeezed the top of his shoulder like his own father used to do, like he should have been doing for 18 years. "Don't stay up too late," he said. "You have that study group in the morning." "I won't," Isaiah promised, smiling up at him. "Good night, Grandfather." "Good night, son." Samuel walked to his own room, his heart fuller than it had been in decades. He had lost so much time, made so many mistakes, but he had been given something precious, a second chance. A chance to be the grandfather he should have been from the start. A chance to watch Isaiah grow into the remarkable young man he was becoming. A chance to turn his failure into redemption. In his essay, Isaiah wrote about survival and resilience. He wrote about the moment everything changed, the day a stranger walked into a shelter kitchen and revealed he was his grandfather. He wrote about learning that he hadn't been forgotten or abandoned, that someone had been fighting for him all along, even if he didn't know he needed to. He wrote about the trial and watching justice finally catch up to cruelty. But mostly he wrote about hope, about learning that your worth isn't determined by how people treat you, but by who you choose to become despite everything. The essay ended with a line that would later become his personal motto. The money was never what mattered. It was being seen, being loved, being given the chance to become who I was meant to be. Isaiah saved the document and closed his laptop. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago glittered below like a field of stars. Somewhere out there were other young people like him, struggling in shelters or worse, believing they were alone. But they weren't alone. Isaiah would make sure of that. He would use his story, his education, his resources to be the voice they needed. He would advocate and fight and refuse to let others be invisible the way he had been. Because he understood something profound now. Suffering can either break you or forge you into something stronger. Isolation can either destroy you or teach you the power of connection. Being knocked down can either keep you there or show you how to rise with more purpose than before. Isaiah chose to rise. He chose to transform his pain into purpose, his trauma into testimony, his survival into service. And in doing so, he honored the mother he never knew, the grandfather who found him just in time, and the countless others who weren't as lucky. The scholarship fund grew. More young people received second chances. More lives were changed. And in a penthouse 72 floors above the city, a grandfather and grandson built the relationship they had been denied, one conversation and shared meal and precious moment at a time.